So right, we have defined the J integral for load control, and we have defined the J integral for displacement control, right? And we are not showing the derivations and details, but this last statement is unbelievable. J for load control is equal to J for displacement control. So whether you define it like this or you define it like this, the value that you get in the end will be the same. So this is again one remarkable property of the J integral. This is now the full figure. We showed you last time figure 3.8. I just showed you this specimen side of it. This is a standard, right? This is a standard. The compact specimen with edge, V notch edge of A size, and the load P and the displacement delta and so on. Now if you apply this, and as the load increases and the delta increases, you apply the theory of non-linear elasticity, right? That this curve is like the curve of a standard material, the linear curve and the non-linear curve. But we are assuming that if it is unloaded, we will not go there. We are going, so this is the same non-linear elastic material behavior, and it is load against displacement, P against delta, load against displacement. So you, right, there is one line and there is the other line, and on one side we at any load P, there is any displacement delta. Any load P, there is any displacement delta. So if we take a very small area, infinitesimal area, where the size is d delta, right? Delta is changing. If the size is d delta, then this small change is dp. The minus sign, remember, the minus sign is there because of the way the thing is that if we work on the material, energy is positive. If the crack opens, the energy is released from the system, it is minus. So there is a minus, right? But that is it. So d delta is here and d is here, and this area will be the work done or the energy absorbed or the energy released and so on, right? It is very simple to understand. So this is the load displacement curve for this type of a test, and if you are doing it and we are assuming this non-linear elastic behavior, then this is the way you define the J integral and so on. So using definitions of U and U star, we can express J in terms of load and displacement. We are again skipping the full derivations. We are directly giving you the results that J is equal to del A. It is DAVA, but I call it del to be short, del A of integral delta dp, right, under load control. So you initially do this and then you take the, right, so you define this much, U or U star, and then you take the partial derivative with respect to the area. Remember, this area is the capital area A, but if we assume unit thickness capital B, the thickness of the specimen is unity, then capital A is a small a. And we know that this is one basic major theory in differential calculus and so on, limits and continuity, that if continuity of the curve is maintained, there are no singular points, no discontinuities, then integration and differentiation are you can exchange them. So here the differential is outside, here the integral is outside, and we take this inside. So del delta del A P dp, right? So this is a major thing that we can do with the limits and continuity and so on and differential integration, that we can shift the integral and the differential inside. So this is now the final definition. So whatever delta you define, you take the derivative with respect to A, and whatever you get, then you integrate it, and this is under load control. Now under displacement control, rather than saying delta dp, you say p d delta, because now delta is the variable, right? So, and the integral is from 0 to delta. Here dp was there, right? Load is changing and it is changing from 0 to p. Here d delta, displacement, is changing and it is changing from 0 to delta. Otherwise it is the same thing. but because you have gone from load to displacement, so it is minus. So del A integral P d delta. And again, if we do the shift because of continuity, then the integral goes out. It is del P del A under load displacement control d delta. So these are mathematically very beautiful relationships. The derivation is of course beyond us, and so on. So integrating the above equation by parts, because right, we can't do otherwise, gives the rigorous proof of what figure 3.8 tells us, that both of the above equations are equal and that J is the same for fixed load and fixed grip conditions, right? So either we have load control or we have grip conditions, which is delta, displacement control. And if you do the integration by parts of this one or this one, then we will find out that in the end we get the same expression. So for the mathematical background, for us, how the theory was developed, this much is enough. Now repeat, J is a more general version of the energy release rate, right? Because the definition that it is the differential of the potential energy with respect to area is the same. But if we do it only for linear, it is G. If we do it for non-linear, it is J. So J is a more general version for a special case of linear elastic material. If the material is linear elastic, then J becomes G. It is the same thing. Also, for linear elastic mode 1 loading, J is the same as G, K1 squared by E dash. Remember, right? This was G, but now it is J. So J is for elastic plastic, right? J is for elastic plastic. And it is the same thing. It is the differential of the potential energy with respect to the crack surface. So it is defined for the whole elastic plastic region. Now, if our material is purely brittle and there is only the elastic region, or the material is a very hard metal and it is almost only in the elastic region, then the whole solution reduces only to the linear elastic region, and therefore J will be equal to G. And that means that G is a subset of J. Okay. So this was the brief background of the two major quantities that define elastic plastic fracture mechanics, the CTOD, crack tip opening displacement delta, and the J integral, right? And now can we discussed the practical measurement of CTOD at the end of the CTOD section. So now the laboratory measurement of J, because J, we told you, is more popular and more successful in handling elastic plastic fracture mechanics. Therefore, we will discuss the laboratory measurement of J a little more than we do for CTOD. When the material behavior is linear elastic, calculation of J in a test specimen or a structure is relatively simple, because J is equal to G, and G is uniquely related to stress intensity factor. Do you understand? We want to find J, but our material is linear elastic. So if the material is linear elastic, we know that J is equal to G, and we know that G is equal to K1 squared by E or something. So therefore we actually experimentally find K1 and find G from there. G can be computed from load and crack size, assuming a K solution for that particular geometry is available. Remember table 2.4, that there are many specimen geometries for which the solutions are there. Computing J integral is more difficult when the material is non-linear. When the material behaves linearly, no issue, right, as we have discussed. But when the material is non-linear, then the real J will come. The principle of superposition no longer applies, because the principle of superposition assumes linearity, and J is not proportional to the applied load. Now it is non-linear. A simple relation between J, load, and crack length is usually not available, right? Just like the linear cases, it is not available, so it is a little tougher. One option for determining J is to apply the line integral definition to the configuration of interest. Whatever configuration of interest, I mean whatever geometry we have. Reed, scientist, it is not read it. Reed is a scientist. He measured J integral in test panels by attaching an array of strain gauges in a contour around the crack tip. Do you understand? There is a crack tip and you are defining any contour. So on this contour, one strain gauge, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he made lots of strain gauges around a contour. Remember that J integral is around any contour, right? Since J is path independent and the choice of the contour is arbitrary, he selected a contour in such a way as to simplify the calculation of J as much as possible. This method can also be applied to finite element analysis. Stresses, strains and displacement can be determined along a contour and then can be calculated according to the equation. We will, the equation is there, right? However, this contour method for determining J is impractical, not practical in most cases. The instrumentation required for experimental measurements of the contour integral is highly cumbersome. You see, you define any curve, and on that curve you place a lot of strain gauges which are perfectly aligned and so on. So the experimentation is tough. Also, the contour method is not very attractive in numerical analysis. When we do finite elements, it is not very attractive. So because of both the reasons, that the experimental setup is tough, complicated, costly, time consuming, and when we try to use this experimental setup to define numerical analysis, then it again becomes tough. So the method was there, and if nothing else was there, this method would be there, but this method was improved. Lands and Begley were among the first to measure J experimentally successfully. They used the energy release rate definition. We will show you the figure very soon, a schematic illustration of their approach. They take a series of test specimens of the same size, geometry and material. This is there, that this is still tough experimentally because they have to make many specimens of the same material of exactly the same size and geometry. They introduce cracks of various lengths. They deform each specimen and plot the load versus displacement. The area under a given curve is equal to the energy A, energy absorbed by the specimen. So they do load versus displacement, and then the area under the curve is U. So then they plot U against the crack length for various fixed displacements. We will just show you the figure and it will become easier. So now this is the figure. Again, whenever I show any figure or any picture or anything, don't get confused by looking at the whole thing. Look at one part only. So first the heading is schematic of early experimental measurements of J performed by Lands and Begley. A only, A. They have done the experiment, the same sample specimen is there, the V-notch edge specimen, and they have different samples for different initial crack sizes. So for example, if the crack size was A1, they did the experiment, and as P changed and as delta changed, they plotted this. For different values of P, there were different values of delta. Only for one curve, look at only one curve, because this specimen is of crack size A1, So they plotted this. Similarly, they had another specimen of crack size A2, another of crack size A3, another of crack size A4, and each time they conducted the experiment and measured, right, that at different loads, as you keep on increasing the load P, what happens to the delta, the opening. So you get curve 1, 2, 3, 4. Each curve is for one crack size. So therefore, as we said, we need lots of samples of different crack sizes from exactly the same material and same geometry. So you get part A of the figure.